In the small town of Millbrook, where dreams often rusted alongside abandoned cars and forgotten garages, Tom Hunter wiped his oil-stained hands on a faded rag and surveyed another day of endless repairs. The single father had built his life around two unwavering principles: fix what's broken and protect what matters most. At 42, his weathered face told the story of countless hours spent beneath car hoods, wrestling with stubborn engines, while his 10-year-old daughter Emily waited patiently in the corner of his modest auto shop. Tom never expected much from life beyond honest work, and his daughter's laughter echoing through their small home each evening. He certainly never imagined that a simple truck repair would change everything he thought he knew about love, money, and the invisible barriers that separate different worlds. When a battered pickup truck pulled into Hunter's auto repair that crisp Tuesday morning, carrying a woman whose dirt-stained work clothes and calloused hands told the story of a struggling farmer, Tom saw exactly what she wanted him to see. He had no way of knowing that the woman introducing herself as Daisy Phillips was actually the sole heir to a $50 million agricultural empire, desperate to escape the suffocating world of wealth and privilege. As Tom agreed to fix her broken-down truck, he unknowingly began a journey that would challenge everything he believed about class, authenticity, and whether true love could survive the revelation of such an extraordinary deception. Tom Hunter had learned early that life rarely offered second chances to men like him. 3 years had passed since his wife Sarah died in that terrible car accident, leaving him to navigate the treacherous waters of single parenthood while keeping his struggling auto repair business barely afloat. Every morning began the same way. Watching Emily board the yellow school bus from their front porch, her oversized backpack bouncing against her small frame as she climbed those steep metal steps. Their house stood as a testament to making do with less peeling paint on the shutters, a front door that stuck in humid weather, and a kitchen where every appliance had been coaxed back to life, at least twice, through Tom's stubborn determination and mechanical skill. The mortgage payments stretched his budget thin each month, and he often found himself choosing between fixing the leaky roof or buying Emily the books she desperately wanted to read. Yet Tom took genuine pride in his work, in the honest sweat that built thick calluses on his palms and the deep satisfaction of hearing a dead engine roar back to life after hours of careful attention and patient troubleshooting. His customers throughout Millbrook knew Tom as a man of few words but absolutely reliable hands, someone who charged fair prices, never cut corners on safety, and could diagnose problems that left other mechanics scratching their heads in confusion. The garage itself embodied organized chaos. Tools hung precisely on pegboard walls, according to Tom's meticulous system. Parts bins bore labels written in his careful block letters, and an ancient coffee pot brewed the thick, bitter fuel that sustained him through those long repair sessions that stretched well into the evening hours. He had harbored dreams once of expanding the business into the empty lot next door, maybe taking Emily on a real vacation to see the ocean she had only experienced through library books and nature documentaries. But those ambitious visions had been gradually ground down by the relentless daily necessity of survival, the constant juggling of bills and responsibilities that left little room for anything beyond the immediate demands of keeping food on the table and a roof over their heads. Still, Tom found unexpected moments of deep contentment in the familiar rhythm of his work, and the sound of Emily's pencil scratching across homework assignments at the small desk he had constructed in the corner of his cluttered office. On that particular Tuesday morning in late September, Tom was deep into replacing the transmission on a 2003 Honda Civic when the distinctive rumble of an old truck engine struggling to maintain idle caught his attention through the open bay door. He paused in his work, wiping greasy hands on his coveralls, as he watched a faded blue pickup truck roll to an unsteady stop in his gravel driveway. The vehicle looked like it had survived decades of hard agricultural work. Deep dents scarred the metal bed, rust climbed steadily up the wheel wells like some persistent disease, and the windshield bore a spider web of cracks from what appeared to be a recent encounter with a large flying rock. Black smoke occasionally belched from the exhaust pipe and Tom could hear the engine's irregular idle even from inside his garage. This was clearly a truck that had been pushed far beyond its recommended service intervals, the kind of mechanical emergency that usually brought desperate farmers to his door when their equipment failed during crucial harvest season. Tom set down his socket wrench and walked outside. His practiced eye already cataloging the obvious signs of neglect and abuse. As he approached the driver's side window, the woman who stepped out of the battered truck immediately surprised him with her appearance. She looked to be in her early 30s, with rich auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that had clearly been styled more for function than fashion. Her clothes spoke unmistakably of someone comfortable with serious physical labor. Well-worn jeans bore honest dirt stains from recent outdoor work. Her leather boots showed the kind of scuffs and wear that came from years of real use, rather than fashion statements. And she moved with the confident, purposeful stride of someone thoroughly accustomed to handling her own problems without asking for help. Yet something in her overall bearing seemed subtly at odds with her utilitarian appearance, though Tom could not immediately identify what felt different about her compared to the typical farmers and working people who frequented his garage. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and a direct gaze, simply saying her name was Daisy Phillips, and that she desperately needed help with her truck. Her voice carried a slight accent that Tom could not quite place, educated but not pretentious, confident without being demanding. As she began explaining the symptoms her vehicle had been displaying over the past week, Tom found himself impressed by her mechanical knowledge. She described the grinding noises during gear shifts, the occasional stalling at stop signs, and the clutch that seemed to be slipping more severely with each passing day. This was clearly not someone who could be easily misled by unnecessary repairs or inflated prices, and Tom appreciated dealing with a customer who understood the basic principles of automotive function. She explained that she was in the middle of harvest season and absolutely could not afford to have her primary vehicle out of commission for any extended period. The urgency in her voice seemed genuine, and Tom recognized the familiar desperation of someone whose livelihood depended entirely on reliable transportation. As they walked around the truck together, discussing potential problems and estimated repair costs, Tom discovered an unexpected ease in their conversation that he rarely experienced with customers. Daisy asked thoughtful, intelligent questions about his diagnostic process, seemed genuinely interested in the technical aspects of engine repair that usually bored people to tears, and even inquired about the framed photograph of Emily that sat prominently on his cluttered workbench. Her attention to that personal detail touched something in Tom that had been carefully guarded since Sarah's death. The simple human need to be seen and acknowledged as more than just a provider of mechanical services. There was something almost magnetic about Daisy's presence. A natural warmth that made even the mundane details of automotive troubleshooting feel like engaging conversation rather than tedious business transaction. When she mentioned that arranging alternative transportation while the truck underwent repairs would be difficult, Tom surprised himself by immediately offering to lend her an old sedan he kept specifically for such customer emergencies. Daisy accepted his generous offer with a radiant smile that completely transformed her face, revealing a depth of warmth and gratitude that made Tom suddenly realize how long it had been since anyone had looked at him with such genuine appreciation for a simple act of kindness. After Daisy drove away in the borrowed sedan, Tom found his thoughts returning to her far more frequently than seemed appropriate for a routine customer interaction. There had been something uniquely compelling about her presence, a fascinating combination of obvious strength and subtle vulnerability that he could not easily categorize or dismiss from his mind. As he began the detailed diagnostic work on her truck over the following 2 days, Tom discovered that its mechanical problems were significantly more extensive than their initial conversation had suggested. The clutch assembly needed complete replacement. The transmission required major internal work. Several engine components showed clear signs of long-term neglect, and the electrical system had developed the kind of intermittent faults that could take hours to properly trace and repair. Yet when Tom called Daisy to discuss the expanded scope of necessary repairs and the substantially increased costs, she simply asked him to do whatever work was required to make the vehicle completely reliable again, showing no concern whatsoever about the expense involved. Her casual attitude toward what represented a significant financial burden struck Tom as distinctly unusual for someone he had assumed was operating a small farm on an inevitably tight budget, but he attributed her lack of price sensitivity to the practical necessity of having dependable transportation during the crucial harvest period. While working methodically through the truck's various mechanical problems, Tom began noticing small details that seemed oddly inconsistent with his assumptions about Daisy's circumstances and background. The vehicle's registration documents showed an address in Fairfield Heights, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the entire county, rather than the rural farming area he had expected. The insurance paperwork bore the distinctive letterhead of Cornerstone Premium Coverage, a company that specialized in high-value policies for wealthy clients rather than basic agricultural vehicle protection. Most puzzling of all, tucked beneath the passenger seat, Tom discovered an elegant business card for Le Bernardin, an exclusive French restaurant in the city that charged more for a single dinner than most of his customers spent on major automotive repairs. These discoveries created an uncomfortable sense of cognitive dissonance that Tom tried unsuccessfully to push aside as he focused on the mechanical work at hand, but the nagging questions about Daisy's true circumstances continued to trouble the edges of his consciousness, like a persistent itch he could not quite reach to scratch. When Emily bounced through the garage door that Thursday afternoon, her school backpack sliding off one shoulder as she searched for her father, she immediately noticed the unusual truck occupying the center service bay. Emily had inherited her mother's natural curiosity about people and her father's practical intelligence about mechanical things, and she wanted to know everything about the mysterious vehicle and its absent owner. Tom explained that the truck belonged to a local farmer who needed extensive repairs, and Emily listened with the kind of focused attention she typically reserved for subjects that truly captured her imagination. As if summoned by their conversation about her, Daisy arrived just minutes later to check on the progress of the repair work, and Emily had her first opportunity to observe this woman who had somehow managed to occupy so much of her father's attention over the past few days. The interaction between Emily and Daisy was immediate and remarkably natural, as if they had been introduced by mutual friends rather than meeting for the first time in a cluttered automotive garage. Daisy knelt gracefully to Emily's eye level, asked genuine questions about school subjects and extracurricular activities, and listened to the answers with the kind of complete attention that children instinctively recognize and appreciate. Emily, who had developed a cautious wariness around new adults since her mother's tragic death, seemed to relax completely in Daisy's presence within minutes of their first exchange. They quickly discovered a shared passion for reading, particularly adventure stories and historical fiction, and Daisy mentioned several specific titles that Emily had been desperately wanting to read, but that Tom simply could not afford to purchase on his tight budget. Before leaving the garage that afternoon, Daisy casually mentioned that she happened to have extra copies of those exact books at home and would be delighted to lend them to such an obviously enthusiastic young reader. Tom watched this entire exchange with a complex mixture of emotions. Genuine gratitude that someone was showing such thoughtful kindness to his daughter, and a growing awareness that his initial assumptions about Daisy Phillips might be significantly incomplete or even entirely incorrect. The following week brought Daisy back to the garage, not only to collect her fully repaired truck, but also carrying a canvas tote bag filled with books specifically selected for Emily's reading level and interests. Tom was immediately struck by the obvious quality and expense of these volumes. Pristine hardcover editions, many of them recent releases, and several titles that he recognized as costing $30 or $40 each in bookstores. When he attempted to express his gratitude for such generous gifts, Daisy dismissed his thanks with an elegant wave of her hand, claiming that the books had simply been collecting dust on her shelves and would be far better appreciated by someone with Emily's obvious enthusiasm for literature. Emily's pure delight was absolutely infectious, as she immediately settled into the comfortable old armchair that Tom kept in the corner for customers who preferred to wait while their vehicles were being serviced, her small form curling up with one of the novels, as if she had discovered buried treasure. As Tom completed the final mechanical adjustments on Daisy's truck, carefully checking fluid levels and testing all the repaired systems, he found himself genuinely reluctant to finish the job. The completion of her repairs would logically mark the end of their business relationship and probably eliminate any reason for future contact, a prospect that left him feeling unexpectedly melancholy. Daisy seemed to share his reluctance to conclude their interactions, lingering in the garage far longer than necessary and asking detailed technical questions about the repair work that went well beyond simple curiosity about her vehicle's current condition. Their conversation meandered comfortably through diverse topics including work philosophies, family relationships, and the particular challenges of rural life. And Tom discovered that Daisy possessed an unusual combination of practical knowledge and sophisticated insight that both intrigued and slightly puzzled him. Her observations about agricultural economics were remarkably astute. Her understanding of mechanical principles was surprisingly advanced, and her perspectives on social issues reflected a breadth of experience that seemed inconsistent with the simple farming life she claimed to live. When she finally drove away in her perfectly functioning truck, Emily looked up from her book with bright eyes and asked the question that Tom had been trying not to think about. When would Daisy visit them again? Over the following weeks, Daisy began appearing at Hunter's Auto Repair with increasing frequency, and each visit seemed to strengthen the growing connection between her and Tom's small family. Sometimes she arrived claiming to need minor adjustments to her truck's newly repaired systems. Other times she brought additional books or small educational gifts for Emily, and occasionally, she simply appeared during Tom's lunch break to share homemade sandwiches and engaging conversation about everything from local politics to classic literature. Tom began to look forward to these visits as the absolute highlight of his workdays, though he continued to struggle with understanding why someone who appeared to be managing a busy agricultural operation would have time for such casual, extended socializing. He found himself studying Daisy more carefully during their interactions, noting details that seemed to contradict the simple farmer persona she maintained. Her stories about agricultural work were impressively detailed and completely convincing, yet Tom occasionally caught glimpses of knowledge and experiences that seemed fundamentally inconsistent with the modest rural life she described. She would casually mention expensive farming equipment that small operations could never afford, reference complex financial instruments used in international commodity trading, and demonstrate familiarity with global agricultural markets that suggested formal education and professional experience, far beyond what a typical small-scale farmer would possess. When Tom gently attempted to probe these apparent inconsistencies, Daisy would skillfully deflect his questions with humor or smoothly redirect their conversation towards safer, more neutral topics. Meanwhile, Emily had developed an obviously deep attachment to Daisy, practically glowing with excitement whenever she arrived and engaging in animated discussions about books, school projects, and dreams for the future, with an enthusiasm that Tom had not witnessed since his wife's death. The growing emotional bond between his daughter and this mysterious woman both pleased and concerned Tom, as his paternal instinct sensed that there were important truths about Daisy Phillips that remained carefully hidden beneath her meticulously constructed facade. One crisp afternoon in late October, Tom's delicate balance of curiosity and respectful restraint was completely shattered by an accidentally overheard phone conversation that revealed the stunning truth about Daisy's real identity. She had arrived at the garage during Emily's school hours and was helping Tom organize his chaotic parts inventory when her cell phone rang with obvious urgency. She answered the call automatically, stepping only a few feet away from where Tom was working, apparently assuming that the noise from his pneumatic tools would completely mask her conversation from his hearing. However, Tom had just switched off his air compressor to check a pressure reading, and Daisy's side of the conversation came through with startling, unmistakable clarity that changed everything he thought he knew about the woman he was falling in love with. She was speaking with someone she addressed respectfully as Charles, discussing what appeared to be a multi-million-dollar land acquisition deal and the critical timing of an upcoming board meeting that would determine the future direction of major business operations. Her tone was crisp, authoritative, and thoroughly professional, as she used sophisticated financial terminology that revealed comprehensive understanding of complex corporate transactions, international market fluctuations, and strategic business planning. Tom heard her mention concerns about unwanted media attention, discuss strategies for avoiding public scrutiny of her personal activities, and emphasize the absolute necessity of maintaining her current low profile until certain sensitive deals could be finalized without external interference. She referenced board members by their first names, with the casual familiarity of someone accustomed to wielding significant corporate authority, spoke knowledgeably about stock prices and shareholder expectations, and demonstrated intimate knowledge of agricultural commodity markets that operated on a scale far beyond anything a small farmer would ever encounter. Tom stood completely frozen in place, holding a fuel pump assembly in his trembling hands, as the full implications of what he was hearing slowly penetrated his shocked consciousness like ice water spreading through his veins. When Daisy ended her call and turned back toward him with a casual comment about the afternoon weather, her expression immediately registered that something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere between them. Tom's face must have clearly revealed his complete bewilderment and growing sense of betrayal, because she stopped mid-sentence in whatever innocent remark she had been preparing to make. For several long, agonizing moments, they simply stared at each other in absolute silence, both recognizing that a crucial threshold had been irreversibly crossed, and that their relationship could never return to its previous state of comfortable, trusting ambiguity. The woman he had believed to be a struggling farmer was clearly someone else entirely, someone with access to wealth and power beyond anything he had ever imagined, and Tom felt the solid ground of his understanding shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. The conversation that followed that devastating revelation was unlike anything Tom Hunter had ever experienced in his 42 years of life. Daisy, recognizing that her carefully maintained cover identity had been completely compromised by her careless phone conversation, made a decision that surprised them both with its courage and vulnerability. She chose complete honesty over continued deception, regardless of the personal consequences. Sitting on 2 overturned oil drums in Tom's cluttered garage, surrounded by the familiar tools and mechanical debris of his working life, she began to tell him the truth about who she really was, and why she had been living such an elaborate lie for the past 6 months of their relationship. Daisy Phillips was the sole heir to Phillips Agricultural Holdings, a massive corporate conglomerate that owned over 40,000 acres of prime farmland across 3 states, controlled processing facilities that handled crops from hundreds of independent farmers, maintained extensive business relationships with international food distributors, and employed over 2,000 people in various agricultural and related industries. Her personal net worth, she admitted with visible discomfort and obvious embarrassment, was conservatively estimated by financial advisors at over $50 million, with the potential for significant growth as she assumed greater control of the family business empire that her grandfather had built from nothing, and her father had expanded into a corporate giant. The shabby pickup truck, the dirt-stained work clothes, the calloused hands, the detailed knowledge of farming operations. All of these elements were completely genuine, but they represented her desperate attempt to experience authentic life outside the suffocating, artificial world of extreme wealth and social privilege into which she had been born and raised. For the past 6 months, she explained with growing emotion, she had indeed been living in a modest apartment under a carefully constructed false identity, working long days on a small leased farm property, and trying to understand through direct experience what it truly meant to earn money through honest physical labor rather than inherited capital and investment returns. She had come to Tom's garage that first day not because she was genuinely a struggling farmer in need of automotive repairs, but because she was desperately seeking authentic human connections with people who would judge her based solely on her character, work ethic, and personal qualities, rather than her enormous bank account and famous family name. The admission left her visibly emotionally drained, as if the sustained effort of maintaining such an elaborate deception had been far more psychologically exhausting than she had initially realized, and she waited for Tom's response, with an expression that mixed genuine hope and resigned acceptance of probable rejection in equal, heartbreaking measure. Tom's initial reaction was far more complex and nuanced than Daisy had expected, based on her previous experiences with people discovering her true identity. Rather than the anger at being deceived that she had braced herself to encounter, he felt a profound sense of emotional displacement, as if the solid ground beneath his feet had suddenly shifted to reveal a vast chasm he had never known existed between their two completely different worlds. The woman he had been growing to care about deeply, and he could no longer deny to himself that his feelings had developed far beyond simple friendship or casual attraction, was not remotely who he had believed her to be for all these weeks. Of growing intimacy and trust. More troubling than the deception itself was his dawning realization that their entire relationship had been built upon a fundamental inequality so extreme that he had been completely unable to perceive its existence, even when the evidence was right in front of him. While he had been lying awake at night, worrying about affording Emily's school supplies, calculating whether he could possibly manage a modest summer vacation, and stretching every dollar to cover basic household expenses. Daisy had possessed the financial means to solve every monetary problem in his life without creating even a noticeable impact on her own vast resources. The knowledge made him feel simultaneously foolish for his naivety and somehow deeply diminished as a person, as if his daily struggles and legitimate concerns had been revealed to be utterly trivial when viewed from the perspective of her enormous wealth and privilege. Yet even as these painful emotions churned through his mind like a storm, Tom found himself studying Daisy's face with the careful attention he usually reserved for diagnosing complex mechanical problems, and he gradually began to recognize something that significantly complicated his initial response to her revelation. She appeared genuinely distressed by his obvious shock and hurt, not because her secret identity had finally been discovered after months of careful concealment, but because she was terrified of losing the authentic emotional connection they had built together over these past weeks of friendship and growing love. Her vulnerability in that moment seemed more real and honest than anything she had shared with him during their entire relationship. And Tom slowly began to realize that, regardless of her fantastic wealth and corporate power, the person sitting across from him in his humble garage was someone who had taken enormous personal risks and made tremendous sacrifices in hopes of finding the very things he had been freely offering her: unconditional acceptance, genuine companionship, and the precious opportunity to be valued for personal qualities that had absolutely nothing to do with material wealth or social status. The complexity of the situation left him genuinely uncertain how to respond appropriately, torn between feeling betrayed by her deception and gradually recognizing that Daisy's elaborate charade had been motivated not by malice or amusement, but by a deep longing for the authentic human connections that her wealth had apparently made impossible to achieve through conventional means. As the days passed, following Daisy's earth-shaking revelation about her true identity, Tom found himself grappling with questions that seemed to have no easy answers or clear resolution. He watched Emily continue to interact with Daisy during her regular visits to the garage, apparently completely unaware that anything significant had changed in the adult relationship, and Tom wondered whether he had the moral right to make unilateral decisions about their family's future, based on circumstances that his 10-year-old daughter did not understand and might not even care about if she did. Emily's overall happiness and emotional well-being had become noticeably brighter and more stable since Daisy had entered their lives, and Tom could not ignore the obvious fact that his daughter was experiencing a kind of nurturing maternal attention that he, despite his absolute best efforts and sincere devotion, simply could not provide, as a single father struggling with his own emotional limitations and practical constraints. At the same time, Tom struggled intensely with his own complicated feelings about Daisy's extraordinary wealth and what such vast financial resources might mean for any romantic future they could potentially have together. He had built his entire adult identity around the principles of self-reliance, honest work, and the fundamental dignity that comes from earning one's way in the world through personal effort and moral character. These core values seemed to lose all coherence and meaning when viewed through the lens of Daisy's financial reality, where $50 million could solve problems that represented years of worry and sacrifice for families like his. Could he realistically accept help from someone whose resources made his most serious problems seem utterly insignificant? Could he maintain any sense of equality and mutual respect in a romantic relationship where such extreme inequality existed from the very beginning? More importantly, could he trust that Daisy's feelings for him and Emily were genuinely authentic rather than the product of some wealthy person's romanticized notion of simple living and working-class authenticity? These tormenting questions kept him awake during long, sleepless nights and distracted him during his workdays, creating a level of emotional tension and psychological stress that he had never experienced before in his adult life. When Daisy arrived at the garage for her regular visits, Tom found himself simultaneously wanting to embrace her with all the love he felt growing in his heart and needing to maintain careful emotional distance while he worked through the implications of everything he now knew about her true circumstances. He was caught in an impossible bind between his deepening love for this remarkable woman and his profound uncertainty about whether such love could realistically survive the revelation of who she truly was and what that meant for their dramatically different positions in the world's social and economic hierarchy. The brewing crisis finally came to an unavoidable head when Daisy received an urgent phone call that she could not ignore, deflect, or handle privately. Tom and Emily were both present in the garage, working together on a minor repair project that had become one of their favorite father-daughter bonding activities when Charles, whom Tom now understood to be Daisy's family attorney and trusted advisor, called with genuinely urgent news about a family emergency that would change everything. The conversation, conducted with Daisy pacing anxiously around the garage while Tom pretended to focus on his work and Emily read quietly in her usual corner, revealed that Daisy's father had suffered a serious heart attack during an important board meeting and was currently hospitalized in critical condition while demanding her immediate return to assume emergency control of the family business empire. Charles explained with obvious concern that board members were applying intense pressure for a smooth succession plan to be implemented immediately, that financial media outlets were beginning to ask pointed questions about Daisy's prolonged, unexplained absence from corporate responsibilities, and that several major international business deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars were being delayed or potentially canceled, pending her direct involvement in crucial strategic decisions. As Tom listened to Daisy's increasingly emotional responses, her obvious deep concern for her father's health warring visibly with her desperate reluctance to abandon the authentic life she had been painstakingly building with Tom and Emily, he began to understand the true magnitude of the impossible choice she was facing. This was not simply a matter of returning home for a temporary family visit or brief business consultation. It was essentially a summons back to a completely different world of corporate boardrooms, social obligations, media scrutiny, and public attention that would make her current relationship with Tom and Emily practically impossible to maintain. The conversation ended with Daisy reluctantly agreeing to return to her family responsibilities within 48 hours, a commitment that left her visibly shaken, and Tom grappling with the devastating realization that he was about to lose someone who had become far more important to him than he had ever been willing to admit to himself. Emily, sensing the obvious tension and distress, even though she could not understand its source or implications, looked up from her book with the intuitive concern that children often display when the adults they depend on are struggling with problems too complex and overwhelming for easy explanation. That evening, after Emily had been tucked into bed with her usual bedtime story and goodnight kisses, Tom and Daisy sat together on the weathered wooden porch of his small house, watching the last golden light fade from the western sky, and trying desperately to find adequate words for thoughts and emotions that seemed too large and complicated for ordinary language to contain. The night air carried the familiar scents of autumn wood smoke from neighboring chimneys, the last roses blooming in neglected gardens, and the earthy richness of leaves beginning their annual transformation. Daisy spoke first, her voice carrying a weight of sadness and resignation that Tom had never heard before and hoped never to hear again. She explained with painful honesty that returning to her family's world of corporate power and social prominence would mean not only resuming the business responsibilities she had been desperately trying to escape, but also accepting a level of constant public attention and media scrutiny that would make any continuation of their relationship completely impossible to maintain. Phillips Agricultural Holdings was a publicly traded company whose stock price and corporate decisions were regularly covered in financial news. Its major shareholders included prominent political figures and influential business leaders, and any romantic involvement between the famous heiress and a small-town automotive mechanic would inevitably become sensational tabloid fodder that could potentially damage both the business reputation and Tom's quiet, private life. More than that, she confessed with tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. She was genuinely terrified that returning to the insular world of extreme wealth and privilege would gradually change her back into the person she had been before, someone who had possessed everything money could possibly buy, but had never experienced the simple, profound contentment she had discovered in Tom's humble garage and Emily's uninhibited laughter. She had found something in their modest home that her mansion had never contained, despite its luxury and grandeur. The deep peace that comes from being valued and loved for exactly who you are rather than what you possess or represent. This admission broke something loose in Tom's chest, dissolving a tight knot of resentment and confusion that had been building steadily since learning the truth about her identity and circumstances. He finally began to realize that Daisy's extraordinary wealth, which had seemed like an insurmountable barrier separating their two different worlds, was actually something she would gladly abandon completely if doing so meant preserving what they had built together. The crucial question that remained was whether such a dramatic sacrifice would be fair to either of them in the long run, and whether genuine love could survive the enormous weight and pressure of such a life-changing gesture. The following morning brought a resolution that surprised them both with its practical wisdom and emotional courage. Daisy arrived at the garage unusually early, well before Emily had left for school, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee from the local diner, and wearing an expression of determined calm that Tom had never seen before. She had spent the entire night making phone calls to lawyers, financial advisors, and business consultants, and she presented Tom with a carefully thought-out proposal that was both remarkably practical and genuinely radical in its implications for her future. Rather than choosing between her family obligations and her relationship with Tom and Emily, a choice that would inevitably result in loss and regret, regardless of which option she selected, Daisy had devised a way to honor both commitments while creating a sustainable path forward for all of them together. She would indeed return to assume control of Phillips Agricultural Holdings as family circumstances and business necessity demanded, but she would fundamentally restructure her involvement to allow for a life that could realistically include Tom and Emily as her highest priorities. The family business would be completely reorganized with professional management teams handling all day-to-day operations. She would fulfill her legal obligations to shareholders and employees while maintaining a much lower public profile through careful media management, and she would establish her primary residence in a property she already owned just 20 minutes from Tom's garage. The plan would require extremely careful navigation of media attention and social expectations, but Daisy had concluded after her sleepless night of reflection that the happiness and authentic love she had discovered with Tom and Emily was worth whatever complications and challenges might arise from such an unconventional arrangement. She acknowledged honestly that Tom would need to decide whether he could accept a relationship that would inevitably involve some degree of public scrutiny and media attention, and whether he could maintain his sense of personal independence and dignity while being romantically involved with someone whose wealth would always be an unavoidable part of their shared reality. But she was prepared to make whatever adjustments and sacrifices were necessary to preserve what they had built together, because she had discovered through direct experience that love and authentic human connection were infinitely more valuable than any amount of money or social status that existed without them. Tom listened to her proposal with growing amazement, not just at the practical solution she had managed to devise during a single night of intensive planning, but at her obvious willingness to completely restructure her entire life around their relationship and Emily's needs. Emily, who had been listening from the garage doorway with the focused attention that children bring to conversations they instinctively sense will affect their future, stepped forward and took Daisy's hand with a simple, trusting gesture that spoke volumes about the profound emotional bond that had formed between them over these past months of friendship and growing family connection. 6 months later, Tom Hunter was still working in his beloved garage, still taking genuine pride in the honest labor of fixing broken engines and helping his neighbors keep their vehicles running safely and reliably. But his world had expanded in ways he could never have imagined during those early days of uncertainty and emotional turmoil. Daisy had kept every promise she had made, establishing herself in a beautifully renovated farmhouse that perfectly balanced elegance with simplicity, and Tom had discovered that loving someone with substantial wealth was far less complicated than his fears had led him to believe. She had insisted from the beginning on maintaining their relationship as genuine equals, contributing to their shared expenses in careful proportion to her greater resources, but never making Tom feel like a dependent or a charity case. Her ongoing business obligations required occasional travel and attendance at corporate functions, but she had successfully structured her professional schedule to prioritize time with Tom and Emily, often bringing work to the garage so she could remain present during their daily routines and family traditions. Emily had absolutely blossomed under the loving attention of two adults who clearly adored her. Excelling in school and developing new interests and talents encouraged by Daisy's resources and Tom's practical wisdom, the three of them had created a family structure that defied conventional social categories, but provided each of them with something essential that had been missing from their individual lives. Tom had learned that genuine love could successfully bridge significant differences in background and circumstances when both people remained committed to honesty, mutual respect, and shared values. Daisy had discovered that wealth was truly meaningful only when it served to enhance authentic relationships rather than replace them with artificial substitutes. Their story had become a quiet legend throughout Millbrook, living proof that authentic human connections could transcend the boundaries that society typically considered insurmountable, and that lasting happiness often arrived in forms far different from what anyone expected, but infinitely more fulfilling than what anyone had dared to hope was possible.